The quietest prison in America is also the most extreme. ADX Florence does not announce itself with riots echoing through cell blocks or flames climbing the walls. Its power is quieter, colder, and far more deliberate. Sitting on the high plains of southern Colorado, the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, known simply as ADX Florence, was built to remove people from society so completely that even other prisons would never have to deal with them again. This is not a place of chaos. It is a place of control. What happens inside ADX is often misunderstood, exaggerated in movies, or flattened into a single phrase, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The reality is more complicated, more controversial, and far more unsettling. There are no mass riots in the traditional sense. There are no open yards filled with hundreds of inmates. Violence does occur, but not in the way people expect. The most significant battles at ADX are fought in isolation cells, through hunger strikes, lawsuits, self-harm, psychological breakdowns, and the long, grinding effects of extreme confinement. This documentary lays out what ADX Florence actually is, how it came to exist, who is sent there, what violence looks like inside its walls, and why it remains one of the most debated prisons on earth. 1. Why ADX Florence was built. ADX Florence did not emerge out of fear, it emerged out of failure. In the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. federal prison system was struggling to contain a small but dangerous group of inmates who could not be managed anywhere else. These were people who continued to kill, organize violence, or run criminal networks from inside maximum security prisons. Marion Penitentiary in Illinois, then the toughest federal prison, was supposed to be the final stop. That illusion ended in 1983. 2 correctional officers were murdered in separate incidents at Marion on the same day. The response was unprecedented. The entire prison was placed on permanent lockdown. Prison administrators concluded that traditional maximum security facilities were no longer enough. They needed something beyond maximum security, a prison designed from the ground up to isolate individuals completely and indefinitely. Construction on ADX Florence began shortly afterward. It opened in 1994. The goal was not rehabilitation. The goal was incapacitation. Where ADX Florence sits, and why that matters. ADX Florence is located near the small town of Florence, Colorado, surrounded by flat land, open sky, and distant mountains. The isolation is intentional. There are no nearby cities, no large population centers, and no easy access routes. The location minimizes outside interference and limits escape possibilities. The climate plays a role too. Winters are harsh. Summers are dry. The environment reinforces the sense of removal from the rest of the country. ADX is part of a larger federal prison complex that includes lower security facilities, but ADX itself is separate, both physically and operationally. Inmates housed there do not interact with prisoners from other units. The facility operates almost as a prison within a prison system. The architecture of control. Every aspect of ADX Florence is engineered for containment. Each inmate is held in a single cell, roughly 7 by 12 feet. The cell is made of poured concrete. The bed is concrete. The desk is concrete. Even the stool is concrete. The door is solid steel with a narrow slot for food and restraints. The toilet and sink are combined into a single stainless steel unit controlled from outside the cell. Water flow can be turned on or off by staff. Windows exist, but they are narrow and positioned so inmates cannot see the surrounding landscape, only sky. This design choice was intentional, meant to prevent inmates from using visual landmarks to orient themselves or plan escapes. Cameras monitor corridors continuously. Movement is minimized. When inmates leave their cells, they are restrained and escorted. This is not a reactive prison. It is proactive by design. Daily life in near-total isolation. Most inmates at ADX Florence spend approximately 23 hours per day in their cells. Meals are delivered through slots. Communication with other inmates is virtually non-existent. The remaining hour, often less, is designated for recreation. Recreation does not mean a shared yard. It usually means a solitary concrete enclosure, sometimes described as a dog run, where an inmate can walk in circles under open sky. Human contact is limited to brief interactions with staff, often conducted through the cell door. Phone calls are rare and highly monitored. Visits are restricted, non-contact, and infrequent. Mail is screened extensively. Over time, this routine becomes the prison. Who is sent to ADX Florence? ADX Florence does not house ordinary violent offenders. It houses individuals considered too dangerous to be managed anywhere else. This includes inmates who have killed correctional officers, prison gang leaders who continue to direct violence from inside, terrorism-related offenders, individuals who have repeatedly assaulted staff or other inmates, prisoners who escape or attempt to escape from other high-security facilities. Some inmates arrive at ADX as punishment. Others arrive as a preventative measure. Placement is not always permanent, but for many, it becomes exactly that. Violence at ADX. What it really looks like. Contrary to popular belief, ADX Florence is not a place of frequent riots or large-scale inmate violence. The design of the facility makes that nearly impossible. There are no large groups. There are no shared spaces where crowds can form. There is no opportunity for coordinated mass action in the traditional sense. But violence still exists. It simply takes different forms. Individual attacks. Violence at ADX most often occurs during movement, escorts to recreation, medical appointments, or showers. These moments are brief, controlled, and heavily monitored, but they are also the only times inmates are near staff or other humans. Some inmates attempt to exploit these moments. Most attempts fail. When they occur, the response is immediate. The consequences are severe: further restrictions, loss of privileges, and sometimes years added to an already extreme confinement regime. Self-directed violence. One of the most documented forms of violence at ADX Florence is self-harm. Extended isolation has been linked, by courts, psychologists, and human rights organizations, to increased rates of severe depression, anxiety disorders, hallucinations, cognitive decline, self-injury. These incidents rarely make headlines, but they form a significant part of ADX's internal reality. Psychological deterioration. Violence is not always physical. Inmates have reported losing the ability to concentrate, extreme paranoia, emotional numbness, memory problems, difficulty speaking coherently. This deterioration is gradual, invisible, and cumulative. Critics argue that it constitutes a form of psychological harm rather than simple punishment. The myth of riots, and the reality of resistance. ADX Florence has not experienced classic prison riots like those seen at Attica or other historical flashpoints. The architecture prevents it. Resistance at ADX takes other forms. Hunger strikes. Some inmates have engaged in hunger strikes to protest conditions of confinement, particularly prolonged solitary isolation. These strikes are closely monitored, and medical staff intervene when necessary. Hunger strikes rarely lead to immediate policy changes, but they have contributed to legal scrutiny and public awareness. Lawsuits and legal pressure. One of the most significant challenges to ADX Florence has come through the courts. Inmates and advocacy groups have filed lawsuits alleging cruel and unusual punishment, inadequate mental health care, indefinite isolation without meaningful review. Some of these cases have resulted in settlements and policy adjustments, particularly regarding inmates with diagnosed mental illnesses. This legal pressure represents a form of institutional resistance rather than physical rebellion. Mental health controversies. Perhaps the most serious criticism of ADX Florence involves its treatment of mentally ill inmates. For years, individuals with severe psychiatric conditions were housed at ADX under the same isolation protocols as everyone else. Critics argued that this exacerbated their conditions and violated constitutional protections. In response to lawsuits, the Bureau of Prisons made changes, expanded mental health services, created step-down programs, modified placement criteria for inmates with serious mental illness. Even so, critics argue these reforms do not go far enough. The step-down program, a way out? ADX Florence is often described as a dead end, but technically, it is not. The step-down program allows inmates to earn reduced restrictions through years of compliant behavior. Progression is slow and tightly controlled. Stages may include slightly increased out-of-cell time, limited group interaction, more access to programming, transfer to a less restrictive facility. The process can take a decade or more. Some inmates complete it. Many never do. Staff life inside ADX. Correctional officers at ADX Florence operate under conditions unlike those at other prisons. They deal with inmates who are highly manipulative, often ideologically motivated, sometimes openly hostile in some cases. Internationally known figures. Staff receive specialized training focused on control, consistency, and psychological awareness. Emotional detachment is often necessary for safety. Turnover exists, but many staff members remain long-term, citing professionalism and structure as reasons. Media, myth, and reality. Movies and documentaries often portray ADX Florence as a place of constant brutality. That portrayal is misleading. The prison's power lies not in chaos but in monotony. Not in riots but in silence. Not in constant violence but in the slow erosion of time and identity. This distinction matters. Understanding ADX requires abandoning sensationalism and confronting something more difficult, a system designed to remove people not just from society, but from meaningful human interaction. International criticism and human rights debate. ADX Florence has been criticized by human rights organizations, international legal observers, mental health professionals. Some have compared its isolation practices to forms of psychological torture under international law. The U.S. government disputes these claims, arguing that ADX is necessary for national security and prison safety. The debate remains unresolved. Why ADX Florence still exists? Despite controversy, ADX Florence continues to operate for one reason: there is no replacement. The federal prison system still faces inmates who cannot be safely housed elsewhere. Until an alternative model exists, ADX remains the final option. It is not designed to be humane in the conventional sense. It is designed to be effective. The cost of absolute control. ADX Florence forces an uncomfortable question: what is the acceptable cost of safety? Supporters argue the prison protects staff, other inmates, and the public. Critics argue it inflicts lasting psychological harm that extends beyond any sentence. Both claims are grounded in reality. Conclusion: a prison built to be forgotten. ADX Florence does not erupt. It endures. There are no mass riots to shock the nation. No dramatic collapses to force reform overnight. Instead, there is silence, routine, and years passing one identical day at a time. For the people inside, ADX is not a story of constant violence, it is a story of containment pushed to its absolute limit. And for the rest of the country, it is a reminder that the harshest punishments are often the ones no one sees.